Hi, in this video I want to cover a couple of subjects, mainly including subjects of making the distinction between fact and the motivation that we have. I mentioned in the last video about caring. Caring can lead to a solution, um, but the care itself is not needed. The motivation is not needed for something to exist on its own, a value state to exist. And I want to cover things like absolute truth, how it's absolutely true that um, just because it's an absolute truth, this is a better thing, doesn't mean that you have to do it. There's a difference between what's actually going to exist and what you should do, and what you should do isn't always is going to be what you are going to do. But sometimes it's hard to have people react to the idea that something what you did is wrong, regardless of your motivation, regardless of an intent you had, a good intent, a positive intent. It doesn't mean that it doesn't, what you did wasn't good, or at least your intention wasn't good. It just means that there's an outcome, and sometimes you have to face the fiddle and accept the fact, regardless, there was a bad outcome, and you were more or less directly involved in that direct action that led to a direct outcome based on an individual circumstance. Is close to an effect than that effect could have had. Obviously, we all have an effect on everything because there's no way we can avoid it. Everything has an effect on everything. But you were an arbiter of that effect. You were a willing, not necessarily willing, but you were a direct participant in that effect. Far more direct than anyone else, or at least regardless of someone far away from you, you had a more direct effect because you were directly there or closer. So obviously the closer you are to an effect or something happening, the more likely you're going to have be a piece of the direct outcome that happens from you. You're going to have a more of an effect based on how close you are to that event happening, and an effect happening based on how close you are to the effect and what relationships you have to the effect. And it usually has to do with distance, because that's what time, movement, whatever it is, it has to do with distance. And the more closer you are, the more of an effect you're going to have on that outcome or that thing happening, which is everything's an outcome and an effect, because it's a constant moving thing. Speed of light, movement, time, space, it's a constant moving thing that it's just a blend, a constant moving without really any kind of beginning or end when it comes to an initial effect, or past the initial effect. It's just a constant, and it's based on that initial domino drop, whatever it may be, from whatever it may have caused. It's coming from somewhere, causing some kind of long-lasting domino effect of leading to one thing happening after the other. And when it's based off that initial cause, like I've mentioned before. And I want to cover maybe something about learning lessons, and how sometimes people rationalize learning lessons. Their misdoings or the things that they do. People rationalizing the things that they do, and realizing only when it's too late what they did was wrong or a mistake, or not at least admitting those mistakes. So let me cover that real quick, because that should be fairly easy of a subject to cover. And that's pretty much that, yes. For many of us, we rationalize, at least in some circumstances, or lie, or do any kind of thing. We rationalize what we do, or we do something once it's already too late. Oops. Um, you made a mistake. You did something. Oops. But then you realize once it's too late and it's already happened, you rationalize it by saying it's already happened. Oh well. There's nothing you could do about it, and you rationalize it by reinforcing what you did, regardless of what you did, knowing what you did was wrong or right. And people rationalize regardless, or the condition is almost begging for a rationalization, because people seem to do it without any regard to the truth, and it seems to happen all the time. So yeah, I mean, when you rationalize, just because it's too late or it's already happened, or it's too late, you didn't learn from your mistake, because your mistake may have killed you, or you don't remember the mistake you made, you don't remember the exact events leading up to a mistake, or whatever it may have been, or a cause or an effect, or a thing happening. It's no need to rationalize it, accept what you did is wrong, and it's about learning the lesson so the mistake doesn't happen again in the future. And that's exactly the point. You should make sure that the event doesn't happen again in the future. And that's something that should be taken into in everyone's account. But sometimes when there is no future and you made a mistake, Obviously, there's not going to be maybe you making the mistake again, but passing on the mistake, say to someone else, can be or a lesson, passing on a lesson. If you don't have a lesson to give, the mistake's likely to be made again when you had good reason to teach people once you've made the mistake that the mistake shouldn't be made again. So in a way, you're almost leaving it open for a mistake to happen again, regardless of, say, your existence not recognizing from the mistake or whatever it may be, or not, because so yes, you either rationalize or you don't recognize. You rationalize because it's already too late. Um, or it's already too late for you, or any situation concerning, say, a lesson that a lesson opportunity to be learned. You don't take it because it's the end for you or the end for the circumstance. There's no going back, and there's only going back if, say, if you make another, if you risk more than it's worth giving. Um, so there's no taking it back once it's already happened because you already did it. It doesn't matter if you do try to take it back because you can't because it's already happened, but to compensate for it. So instead of compensating, you rationalize, or you rationalize using compensation, or whatever it may be, any number of coping mechanisms people have, and they rationalize it, and then almost in many ways, either they learn from a mistake, or it's just a psychological thing where they rationalize it but they learn their lesson, or they rationalize it and use that as a further excuse or reason or justification, rationalization, any word, for lack of any better words, as a rationalization to do it again and again and again if they desire it so, or they're just lacking in any sort of self-awareness or awareness in general, or any recognition of what's actually going on. So it's happening regardless, but it's no need to rationalize. You have an ability to stop something from happening again. That chance was there. Sort of like doing nothing was like doing something. You should do something if you have a chance, and if you recognize it, to pass on that lesson so someone else can learn it, so the mistake isn't made again. And yeah, that goes down to the same idea of don't rationalize. Make it for the mistake if you can, and if you can't, accept what you did was wrong and learn the mistake and pass that on, regardless of how it's too late or whatever it may be. You don't rationalize. Accept the mistake and then move on, and then realize that you can pass on that ability and almost, in a way, make up by compensation by passing on that lesson to someone else and letting them learn it. Sometimes it goes into all sorts of deep cognitive tricks that you have to play on people to make sure that they almost like reverse psychology to make people learn their lesson, especially when it's not so obvious. Don't do this or don't do that. People may have a tendency to not want to do that because they want to defy it. They want to be dangerous. But that isn't. It's about playing clever mental tricks on people, make sure, as in many cases, that they understand the lesson and learn the lesson well, unless obviously they didn't have the motivation to begin with to do something like that, if that didn't already give them enough cause on its own. Anyway, another thing I want to go on is kind of a blank mind today. Another thing I want to go on tonight is going on to the whole rationalization, people recognizing their mistakes, is and yeah, that's coming from a point of view of frustration dealing with that kind of circumstance, or at least perceived circumstance, or like perceived pain. It's there, regardless of the perceived. It's something that exists. You're perceiving it because it does exist. Regardless of it exists in this way or that way, physically seeing something or hallucinating. The hallucination is fake or false, but it's something that exists. It's false, but it exists. It's false based on that sense. But you're sensing it, and that's all that matters. It exists because it exists. I'm ugly, even though you're not ugly. You see this, even though you don't. It doesn't exist. It exists. It just doesn't exist outside of yourself. It exists as a perception that exists inside of yourself. It's something that exists regardless. So yes, it exists regardless. And another subject I want to cover real quick that I skimmed over at the beginning of this video is absolute truth does not mean you will abide by what is absolutely better. Just because it's better to stop at a red light doesn't mean you're going to stop at a red light, and just because I said it doesn't mean you're not going to do it. It doesn't mean you have to do it. It just means that it's better to do that, and you should do that. Just because you should doesn't mean you will. Just because it's better doesn't mean you have to do it. I mean, it's one of those ideas. It just means we acknowledge it, we recognize it, sort of like recognizing that you made a mistake and then fixing it and making up for it. Same thing with this. It's just recognizing the truth and um, abiding by it as best as you can. As best as you can, because none of us are going to abide by it completely, because there's mistakes and things are beyond our control to a certain extent. We're going to be involved in something regardless of the events. We're going to be imposed on. There's no way to not impose when there's all these, when everything is just an imposition. Everything, every single thing that exists, if it has weight, it has an imposition. And the weight of our idea, our ideas exist in the world because they have an effect on the physical reality of on the physical reality around us, the situation. Of every single interaction that happens, an idea spreads and it's based off an illusion based off of a piece of matter that exists that has an effect regardless. And it only presents a problem when there's sentience that's constantly imposing and there's no way to avoid the imposition all these sentient beings have on each other. Regardless of another sentient being existing or not, you're on an island, you're all alone, no one else exists. There's still an imposition based on the physics of reality moving about in space and things moving in directions and doing all sorts of things. So these things exist regardless of what you want or not want. And that's the problem with sentience. Sentience is constantly fighting a dirty battle between things that don't care, constantly situations, circumstances, or whatever it may be, physical matter running into it regardless. And that's these ideas and these feelings and this projection that come into conflict with this never-ending or this movement that's existing beyond our control. That's why sentience wasn't meant to be in a game without an intention. But we're in a game without intention, and things have an effect regardless, and it's going to happen to us regardless of what we want or not. Sometimes, obviously it's going to happen. We have a conscious, I'm not going to do this, so you don't do it. But things are going to happen regardless because the imposition exists regardless. And it doesn't matter what your individual mind thinks because it's something that happens anyway. You don't want to get hit by a vehicle. But sometimes there's a chance that you will be, and someone else is going to get hit by it, and it might as well have been you because someone else got hit by it. Doesn't mean they're going to feel any less or more pain or whatever it may be. Obviously, they will feel more pain, so you should be the one being a victim. But that doesn't mean that if you were in their exact circumstances, you'd be feeling the exact same pain that they're feeling or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. It's still an experience, and it might as well be you because you might as well be in their situation feeling their pain instead of you them feeling their pain in their situation. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same, but obviously those are value judgments that people can make on an individual level, but it doesn't mean anything because it's going to happen to someone regardless, and it's beyond our control to a certain extent regardless because these impositions are beyond our control. We can have an intent, we can think, but those thinking are just impositions as well based on the physical interaction with the environment. And those things are completely incongruent because it's obviously I'm just physically reacting. I'm having a force feedback projection based on my psychology interacting with the environment, but that doesn't mean it's not going to change based on something else imposing on me. It's always a chance of something happening, and every single interaction is happening against our will to a certain extent, subconsciously, or this thing's happening. And your thoughts are just another thing that's happening that's in conflict with the reality that's existing, regardless of things going the way that they want it and need to go or not. And it's just these base. I'm not going to do this. And it's obviously, you can say that to a general degree, but you can't describe things directly or accurately unless, obviously, description is inadequate. But you can describe something, and your mind rationalizes, "Oh, yes, that's what I did," but it only happened because the imposition deemed it as so, or it deemed it allowable, and it deemed it so, and that's exactly what happened. And that's how many ways we rationalize what happens. Our psychology based on what happens. It happens, and therefore we say, obviously, that's what I thought was going to happen, even though it wasn't you. It wasn't you, but that thought was a part of the interaction that happened, another imposition based on the interactions around us. So it's something that exists, and it's just another piece in the puzzle, your psychology reacting and understanding these things and the wants. It's just another physical reaction existing on this playing field. So it's existing in no different way than anything else existing and moving and reacting. It's just a physical, mechanical reaction leading to something that we call consciousness, sentience. DNA molecule replicating for the sake of replicating for no good reason. And that's all we're doing. But yes, it's happening a certain way, and you can only do so much about it. And the so much is only your awareness of the inside the game, sort of like the awareness of the projection inside your brain. That's as much as you can do. It's just an illusion. Just like the projection inside your brain, your ability to make a choice, like your brain, is only an illusion. And it's only part of the cause and effect that's going to happen regardless. So yes, just because it's absolutely true doesn't mean you're going to do it. Morality, absolute morality, doesn't mean that you're going to do it, because abiding by that is impossible. Things are going to happen a certain way, and just because they happen in a very random, that we perceive way, doesn't mean that there's not an absolute morality, absolute best situation. It exists as an absolute best situation. It just doesn't mean it's going to happen. The possibility is always there for a situation past the initial cause. The initial cause already deemed it so. But there's also a optimal outcome, but that's also an illusion, because things are going to happen regardless. But we can understand, psychologically speaking and philosophically speaking, that there's a good outcome, what you should and shouldn't do before it already happened, based on a situation. But like how, to the extent to which you can do that and the ability to have control over it, are completely illusional. And that's where the illusion comes from. It's an illusion. And your illusion is only guiding you based on awareness. And that's all that you have is awareness, and nothing more, nothing less. We realize it's just our thoughts are very basic. I will do this, and you do it, and therefore what it is what it is. But it didn't happen because of that. It happened because of circumstances. And because you did it doesn't mean you directly described what was happening, but you generally described it in a way that, generally speaking, could be understood. But describing exactly, it doesn't mean anything, because you described that's something that happened, and you did, that's something that happened. And the description means nothing except that it exists in the same world as the thing that you're describing happened. Your description just exists in the same world. It's in the same thing. Describing itself, something describing itself inside itself, it doesn't really work. It doesn't work that way. It just exists in the same thing. So in a way, it's not subjective. It exists regardless on its own in the same thing. So unless you could describe outside the same thing or inside. It's something that's existing regardless. It's something that exists on its own. It doesn't need someone else or something else for it to exist. So it's something that's there. It doesn't need anyone else. Inside or out, it's something that exists, regardless of what someone may say or think or do or whatever it may be. So I think that's all I need to mention. Sorry for the long video. I just wanted to make sure I covered as much as I could, at least remember on the subject. Getting on a roll here, making sure I get the ideas rolling out. And sometimes you just need a little build in momentum when it comes to making videos, because it can be difficult sometimes to make videos, especially when your voice is constantly dried out. Anyway, yeah, that's all I need to mention pretty much. So a few seconds to think if I missed anything. Yes, regardless, description, that doesn't mean anything. It's just describing something inside of the same mechanism that's controlling this description, sort of like the projection of psychology. It doesn't mean anything, it's the same thing. Your description could just be mutually understood between two different parties or two different people, describing yourself, rationalizing, not only rationalizing, justifying, validating. It's just another thing happening in the reality of the universe that we're living in. And that's where it becomes an inadequacy with language, at least when it comes to mutually understanding something. Something can be described, generally speaking, that's what it is, what it's happening regardless of what you say or what you hope in your projections. Things happen, but to a general degree, we can say, yes, just because I had control, because I said something and acknowledged something, this happened. But then when it doesn't happen, we ignore that, and it's just because it didn't happen because life deemed it so. But when it happens, we think we had control over it. We don't have control over it even if we deem it so. It just happened to be the same, and it was generally understood that we would, if you say, I'm not going to die today, and you don't die, it's not because of you, it's just because it didn't happen. Or it was because, or any number of circumstances. I didn't get in a car accident. I didn't walk out the door. I didn't eat this meal. Or you did eat this meal and you happen to eat this meal. It depends on how you describe it, regardless, generally speaking. It's the same reaction existing inside the same world of existence, the same petri dish or same boundary or same whatever it may be, enclosed encasement as the thing, and it's just describing something in the same soup. The the pasta describing the vegetables, whatever it may be, in the same soup, um, in the same bowl. So it's something that's existing regardless, and it doesn't need a rationalization for it to exist, because something would happen regardless of you knowing or thinking any kind of reasonable thought, understanding based on experience. It's going to happen, and depending on how you describe it, it doesn't mean anything. It's still going to happen regardless if you think it or not. That's where the obviously the difference between it's life that gets in the way, or it's you blame yourself, but yourself isn't that game that's controlling the very mechanism. But it doesn't make much of a difference. It's still in the game. It's an illusion, but it's something that exists. Um, that's something that exists regardless. So it's just trying to see where I'm going here. Yes, it exists regardless. It doesn't need anything outside of it. Depending on how you describe it, doesn't matter. It's always life playing the game on you, and not you playing the game on life, or you playing the game of life. Life's playing you, regardless of what you think or what you perceive. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I want to mention. If I have anything else to mention, there's always another time for another video. So until next time, and thank you if you watched this far. Have a nice, whatever.